Zora Vance clutched her backpack tightly against her chest as she stepped out of the tiny, cramped elevator of her apartment building. Her heart was doing a nervous dance in her throat. She had only been in South Korea for 6 months, working as an English tutor to save money for her little sister's surgery back home in Jamaica. She loved the food and the lights, but tonight, the air felt different. It felt heavy, like the sky was about to drop a secret it couldn't hold anymore. Just get to the convenience store and back, Zora, she whispered to herself. Don't look at nobody, don't talk to nobody. But as she turned the corner into a narrow alleyway that served as a shortcut, she saw a man who looked like he owned the very shadows he was standing in. Daeho Park stood by the hood of a sleek, matte black luxury car. He wasn't doing much, just smoking a cigarette, but he radiated a kind of danger that made the hair on Zora's arms stand up. He was tall, wearing a charcoal grey suit that fit him like armor. His face was a mask of cold stone, but his eyes were scanning the street like a hawk looking for a reason to strike. To the world, Daeho was a businessman. To the streets, he was the king of shadows, the man who controlled every port, every club, and every secret in Seoul. He had just finished a meeting where he had to break a man's hand just to make a point about loyalty. He was tired, he was angry, and he was bored of the world. Then, he saw her. He saw a young black woman with skin like velvet and hair like a cloud, walking through an alley where even the police were afraid to go. She looked out of place, like a diamond dropped in a coal mine. Zora tried to walk past him, her head down, but her sneaker caught on a loose cobblestone. She stumbled, her backpack slipping from her shoulder, spilling her Korean language textbooks all over the wet pavement. Darn it, she hissed, dropping to her knees to scramble for her books. Suddenly, a large, warm hand reached down and picked up her dictionary. Zora looked up, and her breath hitched. It was him. The man from the car. Up close, he was even more terrifying and more handsome than she had realized. His eyes weren't just cold, they were lonely. You should not be here, little bird, Daeho said. His English was slow, deep, and had a rough edge to it that sent a shiver down Zora's spine. I was just going to get some milk, Zora stammered, reaching for her book. Her fingers brushed against his, and it felt like a tiny electric shock. Daeho didn't pull away. He looked at her small, dark hand against his pale, scarred skin. In his world, women were either trophies or tools. But this girl, she looked at him with fear, yes, but also with a strange kind of fire. This is not a place for milk, Daeho said, his voice dropping an octave. This is a place for blood. Go home. Before Zora could answer, a loud shout echoed from the end of the alley. 3 men with metal pipes came charging out of the darkness, their faces covered in masks. They weren't after Zora, they were after the King of Shadows. Boss! Look out, one of Daeho's men screamed, appearing from the shadows behind the car. Daeho didn't flinch. He didn't even drop his cigarette. With one hand, he shoved Zora behind him, pinning her against the cold brick wall with the weight of his body. He was like a shield made of muscle and expensive fabric. Stay, he commanded. In the next 30 seconds, Zora witnessed a dance of violence she had only seen in movies. Daeho moved like a shadow. He didn't use a gun. He used his hands, his elbows, and the sheer force of his will. The sound of bone hitting bone echoed through the alley. It was brutal, efficient, and terrifying. When it was over, the 3 men were groaning on the ground, and Daeho was standing there, calmly adjusting his cuffs. He wasn't even out of breath. He turned back to Zora, who was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. He reached out, his thumb catching a stray tear that had escaped her eye. I told you to go home, little bird. Now you have seen my face. Now you are part of my story. Zora looked at the men on the ground, then back at the man who had just saved her. Who are you? I am the man who is going to make sure you get your milk, Daeho said, a ghost of a smirk appearing on his lips. And then, I am the man who is going to change your life forever. He signaled to his driver, and before Zora could protest, she was being guided into the back of the black car. She didn't know it yet, But her life as a quiet tutor was over. She had just been claimed by the most dangerous man in Seoul. And as the neon lights of the city blurred past the window, Zora felt a terrifying realization. She wasn't sure if she wanted to escape. YouTube CTA 1. Oh my goodness, can you imagine being in Zora's shoes right now? 1 minute you're worried about milk, and the next, you're in the middle of a mafia war. Before we find out what Daeho has planned for her, I need to ask, what would you do? Would you run for your life, or would you stay and see where this goes? Let me know in the comments. And if you're loving this story, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me bring more of these emotional stories to you. Daeho sat in the back of the car next to her, the silence between them thick enough to cut with a knife. He looked out the window, his jaw set tight. He was thinking about the hitmen. They were from the Jang syndicate rivals who had been trying to move in on his territory for months. They were getting bold. And now, they had seen him with this girl. He looked at Zora. She was staring at her hands, her braids falling over her shoulders. She looked so small, so innocent. He knew that by saving her, he had put a target on her back. The only way to keep her safe was to keep her close. "What is your name?" he asked, not looking at her. "Zora," she whispered. "Zora Vance." "Zora," he repeated, the name sounding like music in his rough voice. "You have no family here?" "No. Just me. My sister is back in Jamaica. I'm just trying to work, sir. Please, I won't tell anyone what I saw. I promise." Daeho finally turned his head to look at her. "You think I am worried about what you will tell the police? The police work for me, Zora. I am worried about what my enemies will do to you to get to me. But I don't know you," she cried, her voice rising in panic. "They don't know that," Daeho said coldly. "In my world, if I touch something, it belongs to me. And if it belongs to me, people want to destroy it." He leaned closer, the scent of his cologne wrapping around her like a blanket. "From this night on, you will live in my house. You will have everything you need. But you will not leave without my permission. Do you understand?" Zora's heart sank. She was a prisoner. A beautiful, high-end prisoner. She looked at the gold beads in her hair, thinking of the simple life she had yesterday. "And if I say no?" Daeho leaned in even closer, his eyes boring into hers. "Then you will die before you reach the end of the block. I am giving you a choice between a golden cage or a wooden box. Choose, Zora." Zora looked into his eyes and saw the truth. He wasn't being mean, he was being honest. He lived in a world of monsters, and he was the biggest one of them all. She swallowed her fear and nodded slowly. "I choose the cage," she whispered. Daeho nodded once, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "Good. You are a smart girl, Zora. We will get along just fine." As the car pulled up to a massive estate hidden behind high stone walls, Zora realized her journey had only just begun. She was entering a world of shadows, blood, and secrets. But she also saw the way Daeho's hand trembled slightly as he reached for another cigarette, a tiny crack in his armor. The King of Seoul had his prize, but Zora Vance was a girl who didn't break easily. She was going to find out what was behind those cold eyes, even if it was the last thing she ever did. The sun hadn't even started to peek over the Seoul skyline when Nola was woken up by the sound of a heavy wooden door creaking open. She hadn't slept, not really. How could she? She was tucked away in a bedroom that felt more like a queen's chamber than a prison cell, with silk sheets that felt like water against her skin. But the luxury didn't hide the fact that there were men with machine guns standing right outside her door. Daeho stepped into the room. He had changed his suit. He was now wearing a deep forest green blazer over a black turtleneck. He looked refreshed, while Nola felt like she had been dragged through the mud. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask how she slept. He just walked to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtains, letting the grey morning light hit Nola's tired face. "My son is out of surgery," Daeho said, his back to her. "The doctors say if you hadn't stayed to apply pressure to the wound, He would have been dead before the ambulance arrived. Nola sat up, pulling the duvet to her chest. Is he okay? Can I see him? Daeho turned around. His eyes were unreadable. He is resting. But your presence here has created a problem, Nola. My advisors, my family, they think you are a liability. They think a girl from the streets knows too much about our business now. Nola felt a cold shiver run down her spine. I don't know anything. I just wanted to help him. Daeho walked toward the bed, his heavy footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He sat in a chair across from her, leaning forward with his hands clasped. The silver dragon ring on his finger caught the light. In my world, there is a code. I live by 3 rules. 1. Loyalty is paid in blood. 2. A debt must always be settled. And 3. What I claim, I protect. He paused, looking at Nola's dark, beautiful face. You saved the life of the heir to the Park Syndicate. That is a debt I can never truly repay with money. But the law of my world says you cannot leave. If you walk out those gates, my enemies will kill you just to hurt me. If my own men think you are a witness, they will silence you to protect the business. So what are you saying? Nola asked, her voice trembling. Am I going to stay locked in this room forever? Daeho stood up and walked to a small table, picking up a traditional Korean wooden box. He opened it to reveal a simple, elegant jade necklace. There is only one way to keep you safe from both my enemies and my own men. You must become a Park. You must become my wife. Nola's jaw dropped. She felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Your wife. I'm 19. I don't even know your last name. You're a mob boss. It is a marriage of protection, Nola. A contract, Daeho said, his voice as steady as a heartbeat. As my wife, you are untouchable. My men must bow to you. My enemies must fear you. It is the only way you survive the week. Nola looked at the jade necklace. It looked like a noose to her. And what about, being a wife? I don't even know you. This was the moment Daeho's face changed. The hardness stayed, but a flicker of something honorable, something old-fashioned, appeared in his eyes. He stepped closer, towering over her, but he kept a respectful distance. That brings me to my vow, Daeho whispered. I am a man of my word. I know you are young. I know you are a virgin to this world and everything in it. So hear me now, Nola Vance. I will marry you to save your life. I will give you my name and my protection. But I vow, by the blood of my ancestors, that I will never touch you. I will never claim your body or be intimate with you until the day you look at me and ask for it yourself. Until that day, I am your shield, not your husband. Nola stared at him. She saw the seriousness in his expression. In the rough neighborhood she grew up in, men took what they wanted. But this man, this powerful, terrifying mafia king, was offering her a choice. He was offering her a vow of discipline. You promise? She asked softly. No matter what. Even if people are watching? Especially then, Daeho replied. My honor is the only thing I have left that hasn't been stained by blood. I will not break a vow to a girl who saved my son. Nola looked at her dark hands, then at his pale ones. She thought about her sister, Maya, home alone. She thought about the gunman in the alley. She realized she was standing between a fire and a hard place, and Daeho was the only one offering her a hand. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. I'll be your bride. But don't forget your promise, Mr. Park. Daeho nodded once. I never forget. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. The ceremony is at noon. A dress has been brought for you. Put it on. From today, you are the Queen of Shadows. Try to look the part. As the door closed, Nola slumped back onto the pillows. She was about to marry a man who could kill with his bare hands, a man she was supposed to hate. But as she looked at the jade necklace he left behind, she couldn't help but feel a strange, twisted sense of safety. The boss had a code, and for now, that code was the only thing keeping her alive. YouTube CTA2, can you believe it? A marriage proposal in exchange for her life. Daeho is a man of secrets, but that vow he just made, that's some serious discipline. Do you think he'll be able to keep it? Or will the chemistry between them be too much? Stick around because the wedding is coming up next, and it's not going to be the fairy tale you expect. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure you've liked the video. It tells YouTube to show this story to more people like you. By noon, the mansion was buzzing with a quiet, lethal energy. Nola stood in front of a full-length mirror, staring at a version of herself she didn't recognize. She was wearing a traditional Korean hanbok, but it was customized. The silk was a deep, royal purple that made her ebony skin look like glowing silk. Her microbraids were pinned up elegantly, the gold beads replaced with tiny pearls that shimmered in her hair. She looked like royalty, but her eyes still looked like the girl in the yellow hoodie. The wedding was held in the mansion's private garden, a place of silent stone statues and perfectly manicured trees. There were no flowers, no music, and no happy guests. Instead, 20 men in black suits stood in a circle, their faces grim. These were the high-ranking members of the syndicate. They weren't there to celebrate, they were there to witness the boss claiming his new asset. Daeho stood at the end of the stone path. He wore a black traditional robe with silver embroidery. He looked like a king from an ancient era. When Nola walked toward him, he didn't smile, but his eyes tracked her every movement. They stood before an elderly man who spoke in low, rhythmic Korean. Nola didn't understand a word, but she felt the weight of the moment. When it was time to exchange the vow, Daeho took her hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm. He leaned in, whispering so only she could hear. "Remember the code, Nola. From this moment, you are mine. Act like you belong here." He slid a heavy platinum band onto her finger. It felt heavy, like a shackle. "I do," Nola whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. As the priest finished the ceremony, the men in suits bowed in perfect unison. "Congratulations, boss," they shouted, their voices echoing off the stone walls. Daeho turned to his men, his arm sliding around Nola's waist. It was the first time he had touched her like that. She stiffened, but he pulled her closer, his thumb stroking her side in a way that felt like a warning to the world. "This is my wife," Daeho announced, his voice carrying across the garden. "She is the life-giver of my son. Her word is my word. Her safety is my honor. If anyone touches a hair on her head, they will answer to my blade." Nola looked up at him. For a split second, she saw a flash of heat in his eyes, a hunger that he was fighting to suppress. He had made a vow never to be intimate with her, but as they stood there in the cold mountain air, Nola realized that the hardest part of this marriage wouldn't be the enemies outside the gates. It would be the man standing right next to her. The wedding was over, but the war for her heart and her life had just begun. The first night in the Park Mansion as a wife felt less like a honeymoon and more like a stakeout. Nola sat on the edge of the massive mahogany bed, her fingers tracing the intricate embroidery of her purple silk hanbok. The house was deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic footsteps of the guards patrolling the hallway outside. She felt like a character in a movie she hadn't auditioned for, a girl from a world of Sunday dinners and loud Jamaican laughter, now trapped in a palace of ice and secrets. She stood up and began to unpin the pearls from her braids, her reflection in the gilded mirror looking back at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Who was she now? Nola Vance was a girl who worried about bus fare. Mrs. Nola Park was a woman whose name now carried the weight of 1,000 sins. A soft knock at the door made her heart jump. It wasn't the heavy, authoritative thud of Daeho. It was lighter. She opened the door to find a woman around her age, wearing a sharp black suit and a headset. Her hair was pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. "Madam," the woman said, bowing deeply, "my name is Minute G. I am your personal security and handler. The boss has requested your presence in the solarium. He says it is time for you to learn the layout of your new life." Nola followed Minute G through the winding corridors. The mansion was a maze of expensive art and hidden cameras. Every person they passed, maids, cleaners, even the men carrying heavy crates, stopped and bowed until Nolla had passed. It was a level of respect that made her skin crawl because she knew it wasn't earned, it was feared. They reached the solarium, a room made entirely of glass that projected out over the cliffside. The moon hung low over the Seoul skyline, and from here, the city looked like a bed of glowing embers. Dae-ho was standing by a small table, but he wasn't alone. He was looking at a series of digital tablets showing maps and security feeds. As Nolla walked in, she didn't look like a victim. She walked with her shoulders back, her chin tilted up. She was scared, yes, but she was also intelligent. She had spent her life navigating the dangerous streets of her home. She knew how to read a room. Dae-ho turned, his eyes sweeping over her. He noticed she had changed into a simple silk robe, her dark skin glowing under the moonlight. He cleared his throat, his gaze lingering a second too long on the curve of her neck before he looked back at the screens. "You are observant, Nolla," Dae-ho said, skipping the small talk. "Most people in your position would be crying or begging to go home. But you are watching. You are learning. Crying doesn't pay the rent, Mr. Park," Nolla replied, walking closer to the table. "And begging doesn't stop a bullet. You said I'm your wife to keep me alive. If I'm going to be a queen, I need to know what I'm ruling." A flicker of genuine amusement crossed Dae-ho's face. It was the first time his expression wasn't a mask of stone. Spoken like a true Park. "Look here." He pointed to a map of the city. "Seoul is divided. My family controls the south and the ports. The Jang Syndicate, the men who shot my son, control the north. They are desperate. They are losing money, and desperate men are like wounded dogs. They bite anything that moves." Nolla looked at the map, but her mind was elsewhere. "Why did Ji-hoon run away? He's your only son. Why would he leave all this luxury to end up dying in an alley?" The air in the room turned cold instantly. Dae-ho's hand tightened around his glass of whiskey. For a moment, Nolla thought she had pushed too far. "My son has a heart of glass," Dae-ho said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He wanted a life without shadows. He thought he could be a normal man. But you cannot wash the blood off a name like Park. He found that out the hard way." Nolla looked at Dae-ho and saw the pain he tried so hard to hide. He wasn't just a boss, he was a grieving father who didn't know how to talk to his child. "He's lucky he has you," Nolla said softly. "Most fathers wouldn't have sent an army for a son who turned his back." Dae-ho looked at her, then really looked at her. He saw that she wasn't just a beautiful girl he was protecting. She was someone who could see through his walls. He felt the pull of his vow like a physical weight. He wanted to reach out and touch her, to thank her for saving the only thing he loved, but he remembered the promise he made in the bedroom. "Go to sleep, Nolla," he said, turning back to the window. "Tomorrow, the world will know you are my wife. There will be photographers, meetings, and eyes on you at all times. Do not show them your fear. Show them your fire." YouTube CTA 3, wow. Did you see that spark between them? Nolla isn't just a bride, she's becoming a partner, but the danger is only getting closer. Before we move on to Chapter 4, I have a quick question for you. Do you think Nolla can really change a man like Dae-ho, or will his world change her first? Type heart if you think love wins, or shadow if you think the mafia life is too much. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The next morning, Nolla was no longer a ghost in the mansion. She was the main event. Minute G brought in a team of stylists who dressed Nolla in a tailored cream-colored suit that complemented her mahogany skin perfectly. They braided her hair into an intricate crown that made her look like a warrior queen. As she walked down the grand staircase to join Dae-ho for a formal public breakfast in front of his inner circle, she felt the eyes of the underworld on her. These were the capos, the men who ran the drug lines and the gambling dens. They looked at her with suspicion. They saw a black woman from a poor background and wondered why their boss had given her his name. Dae-ho was waiting at the head of the long table. He stood up when she entered, a gesture of respect that made the other men sit up straighter. "You look acceptable," Dae-ho said, though his eyes said she looked breathtaking. "You don't look too bad yourself, boss," Nola teased quietly as she took her seat. The breakfast was a test. The men asked her questions, trying to trip her up, trying to see if she was a spy or just a pretty face. But Nola was sharp. She spoke about her life in Jamaica, about the strength of her community, and about the importance of loyalty. She didn't use big words, but she spoke with a truth that made the room go quiet. Suddenly, the doors to the dining hall burst open. One of the guards rushed in, his face pale. "Boss, it's the Jang Syndicate. They've sent a gift to the front gate." Dae-ho stood up so fast his chair flew back. He didn't say a word as he strode toward the entrance, Nola following close behind despite Minute Ji's attempts to stop her. At the front gate, sitting on the pristine driveway, was a small, scorched teddy bear, the exact kind Nola had mentioned her sister Maya liked during the breakfast. Attached to it was a note in Korean. Dae-ho's face went white, then a terrifying shade of red. He crumpled the note in his fist. "What does it say?" Nola asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the toy. Dae-ho looked at her, and for the first time, she saw pure, unadulterated rage in his eyes. "It says that no gate is high enough to keep out a ghost. They know about your sister, Nola. They know everything." Nola felt like she was going to vomit. Her sister. Her innocent little Maya was now in the crosshairs of a war she didn't understand. "I have to go to her," Nola cried, grabbing Dae-ho's arm. "Please. You promised to protect me." Dae-ho gripped her hands, his silver ring cold against her skin. "I promised you protection, and I will give it. But you cannot go to her. That is what they want. They want you out in the open." He turned to Minute Ji. "Get my private jet ready. Send a team to Jamaica. Bring the sister here. Tonight." He then looked at Nola, his voice a low, lethal promise. "They made a mistake. They brought family into this. And in my code, you don't touch family." As Nola watched the men scramble into action, she realized she was no longer just a mysterious bride. She was the center of a storm that was about to burn Seoul to the ground. And the man holding her hand was no longer just a protector, he was a hurricane. The air in the Park mansion was thick with the scent of ozone and tension. It had been 12 hours since the scorched teddy bear appeared at the gate, and Nola felt like her heart was a trapped bird fluttering against her ribs. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't changed out of her cream suit. She spent every second in the command center, watching the satellite feeds of a small, colorful house in a quiet neighborhood in Jamaica. Dae-ho was a whirlwind of controlled fury. He was on 3 phones at once, barking orders in Korean, his voice like a saw cutting through bone. But every time he caught Nola's eye, his tone would soften just a fraction. It was a detail the other men in the room noticed, and it made them nervous. "My men are on the ground in Jamaica, Nola," Dae-ho said, walking over to her. He looked exhausted, the silver at his temples more prominent under the harsh LED lights. "Your sister, Maya, is safe. She thinks she's going on a surprise vacation to see the big city. My men are careful." "Careful?" Nola whispered, looking at the screens. "Dae-ho, she's 6 years old. She's probably terrified. If anything happens to her because of me." "Nothing will happen," Dae-ho interrupted, his hand hovering near her shoulder before he pulled it back, remembering his vow. "I have sent my most trusted guards. But the Jang Syndicate, they are not done. They want a meeting. They want to see if I've really gone soft for a girl from the islands." "A meeting?" Nola asked, her eyes widening. "You're going to talk to the people who threatened my sister?" "In my world, you talk before you kill," Dae-ho said grimly. "It is the only way to ensure they don't have a backup plan. They've requested the meeting at the Blue Dragon Tea House, neutral ground. And they asked for you to be there." Nola felt her stomach drop. "Me? Why me?" "To see if you are a weakness," Dae-ho said, his eyes turning into black ice. If you show fear, they will strike. If you show strength, they will hesitate. I wouldn't ask this of you if there was another way, but if I go alone, they will think I am hiding you because I am afraid. And a mafia boss cannot be afraid. Nola took a deep breath. She thought of Maya. She thought of the little girl with the same mahogany skin and bright smile, currently flying across the ocean. I'll do it. But you stay close to me. I will be your shadow, Daeho promised. The Blue Dragon Tea House was a place of ancient beauty and hidden daggers. It sat in a traditional Hanok village, surrounded by weeping willow trees and stone lanterns. But as Nola and Daeho stepped out of the black SUV, she noticed the men positioned on the rooftops. Every shadow held a gun. Nola was dressed in a sleek, midnight blue dress that hugged her curves and made her look like a piece of the night sky. Daeho walked beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a protective gesture that felt like a shield. They were led into a private room where the floor was covered in soft tatami mats. Sitting at a low table was a man who looked like a snake in a silk suit. This was Boss Jang. He was older than Daeho, with yellowed teeth and eyes that looked like they had never seen a day of kindness. Ah, the great Daeho Park, Boss Jang sneered in Korean, his eyes immediately sliding to Nola. He looked her up and down with a disgusting hunger. And this is the treasure from the West. I must say, Daeho, your taste is exotic. Daeho didn't sit down. He stood tall, his presence filling the small room. Keep your tongue in your mouth, Jang, or I will pull it out and feed it to the fish in the pond outside. Why are we here? Jang laughed, a wet, rattling sound. So sensitive. I just wanted to see if the rumors were true. They say the King of Seoul has married a girl he hasn't even touched. A virgin queen for a man who usually takes what he wants. Is it true, girl? Does he even know how to hold you? Nola felt her face flush with anger. She didn't wait for Daeho to speak. She stepped forward, leaning her hands on the table and looking Jang straight in his yellow eyes. In my country, we have a saying, Nola said, her Jamaican lilt making her voice sound like honey and gravel. The dog that barks the loudest is the one that's most afraid of the stick. You're barking a lot, Mr. Jang. Is it because you know you're losing? Is it because you know that a man like Daeho has honor, and all you have is a scorched teddy bear and a room full of cowards? The room went deathly silent. Daeho's hand twitched at his side. He was stunned. He hadn't expected Nola to strike back. Jang's smile vanished. He stood up, his hand reaching for something under the table. You little. Before he could move, Daeho was there. In a flash of motion, he had a small, silver blade pressed against Jang's throat. The speed was unbelievable. The meeting is over, Daeho hissed, his voice so low it was terrifying. You threatened her sister. You insulted my wife. You have broken the neutrality of this house. If I see your face again before the sun set tomorrow, I will burn your warehouses to ash with your men still inside. Daeho gripped Nola's hand and pulled her out of the room. They walked through the garden, the tension so high Nola felt like she was vibrating. As they reached the car, Daeho suddenly stopped. He turned Nola around, pinning her gently against the door of the SUV. He was breathing hard, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her knees weak. You were incredible, he whispered, his face inches from hers. But you were also reckless. He could have killed you. I wasn't going to let him talk to us like that, Nola said, her heart hammering. I'm not a trophy, Daeho. I'm your wife. Daeho looked at her lips, then back at her eyes. For a second, Nola thought he was going to break his vow right there under the willow trees. The air between them was electric, full of the things they couldn't say. But then, the sound of a distant police siren broke the spell. Daeho stepped back, his mask of stone returning. We need to go, he said, opening the car door for her. The war has officially started. And this time, there are no rules. As they drove away, Nola looked at the platinum ring on her finger. She had stood up to a monster, and she had seen the fire in the eyes of the man beside her. She realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. And she was doing it for a man who had promised never to touch her, but whose presence felt more intimate than anything she had ever known. The mansion was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. Outside, the city of Seoul was a sea of neon blue and flickering gold, but inside the stone walls of the park estate, the only light came from the moon reflecting off the dark wood floors. Nola stood on her balcony, her mahogany skin catching the silver light. She was wearing a simple silk nightgown, her microbraids falling loose over her shoulders. For the first time since she arrived, she felt a strange sense of peace, because in the room next to hers, her little sister Maya was finally asleep. Dae-ho had kept his word. Maya had arrived 3 hours ago, wide-eyed and clutching a new, UN-scorched teddy bear the guards had bought for her. Seeing her sister safe had done something to Nola. It had shifted her perspective. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore, she was a woman protected by a man who moved mountains to keep her family whole. She heard a soft footstep on the gravel below. She looked down and saw him. Dae-ho was standing in the garden, his charcoal blazer discarded, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He wasn't looking at the city, he was looking up at her balcony. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, a king who had traded his peace for power. "You should be sleeping, Nola," he called up, his voice a low vibration in the night air. "I could say the same to you," Nola replied, leaning her chin on her hand. "The king of Seoul looks like he needs a nap." Dae-ho let out a short, dry chuckle, a sound so rare it made Nola smile. "Kings don't nap. They wait for the shadows to move." He gestured toward the garden. "Come down. The air is clear tonight." Nola hesitated, then grabbed a shawl and made her way down the grand staircase. She found him sitting on a stone bench near a koi pond. The water was still, reflecting the stars above like a dark mirror. As she sat beside him, leaving a respectful distance, she noticed the way he watched her. It wasn't the way Boss Jang had looked at her at the tea house. There was no hunger or disrespect in Dae-cho's eyes. There was only a profound, silent discipline. "I wanted to thank you," Nola said softly, her Jamaican lilt smoothing out the tension in the air. "For Maya. You didn't have to bring her here. You could have just sent guards to her house." "Guards can be bought," Dae-ho said, his eyes fixed on the water. "But these walls are mine. Here, she is safe. And if she is safe, you are focused. I need you focused, Nola. The Jang Syndicate is moving their pieces. They are angry because I humiliated them in front of you." Nola looked at his profile, the sharp jawline, the silver at his temples. "Do you ever get tired of it? The fighting? The codes? The vows?" Dae-ho finally turned to look at her. The moonlight hit the silver dragon ring on his finger. "My life is a series of walls I built to keep the world out. But then you walked into that alley. You were covered in my son's blood, and you were crying for a man you didn't even know. I realized then that I had built my walls so high I couldn't see the light anymore." He leaned in just a little closer. Nola could smell the sandalwood on his skin. "I made a vow to you, Nola. I promised I wouldn't be intimate with you until you asked for it. My men think I am crazy. They think I should claim you to show my power. And what do you think?" Nola asked, her heart skipping a beat. "I think that power isn't taking what you want," Dae-ho whispered. "Power is having the strength to wait for what is real. I don't want a trophy, Nola. I don't want a girl who is forced to be here. I want—" He stopped himself, the discipline kicking back in. He stood up, his tall frame cutting a shadow across the garden. "It doesn't matter what I want. My vow stands. I will watch over you from the shadows. I will be the silent promise that you are never alone again." Nola stood up too, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. She felt the heat of his skin through the silk of his shirt. She saw the way his muscles tensed at her touch, the way his breath hitched. He wanted her, she could feel it in the air between them, but his honor was a shield he refused to drop. "You're a good man, Daeho Park," she said. "In your own twisted, dangerous way." Daeho looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her honey-brown eyes. "Don't tell my enemies that," he said, a ghost of a smile appearing. "It would ruin my reputation." He walked her back to the door of the mansion, standing guard until she was safely inside. As Nola climbed back into her bed, she looked at the city lights reflecting on the ceiling. She realized that the silent promise wasn't just about his vow of intimacy. It was a promise of loyalty, of a bond that was growing deeper than any contract. Daeho was a man of blood and shadows, but in the quiet of the night, Nola realized she was no longer afraid of the monster. She was starting to fall for the man behind the mask. YouTube CTA1, can we just take a moment for that tension? Daeho is out here fighting his own heart just to keep his word to Nola. That's a real man right there. But while they are finding peace in the garden, the Jang Syndicate is planning something that's going to shake Seoul to its core. Do you think the silent promise will be enough to keep them together when the bullets start flying? Let me know your thoughts in the comment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? The next few days were a blur of new normal. Maya was treated like a little princess, with the guards teaching her how to play traditional Korean games in the courtyard. Nola spent her time learning the business, not the illegal parts, but the legitimate companies Daeho used as a front. She was smart, catching errors in the books that even the accountants missed. Daeho watched her from his office balcony. He saw the way she laughed with her sister, the way her braids danced in the wind, and the way the servants started to genuinely love her. She was bringing life into a house that had been a tomb for years. But the peace was a lie. On the fifth night, a silent alarm went off in the command center. Daeho was there in seconds. The screens showed black figures moving through the trees at the edge of the property. Not the Jang Syndicate, these were professionals. Mercenaries. "Lock down the house," Daeho roared. "Get the girl and the child to the safe room, now." Nola was grabbed from her sleep by Minute G. "Madam, we must go. Now. Where's Maya? Where's Daeho?" Nola cried, her voice thick with panic. "The boss is on the front line. Move." As Nola was hurried down a secret corridor, she heard the first explosion. The ground shook, and the sound of gunfire shattered the silence of the hills. She looked back and saw the orange glow of fire reflecting off the marble walls. Daeho was out there. He was fighting for her. He was the silent promise in the middle of the storm, and for the first time, Nola didn't just want his protection. She wanted him to come back so she could tell him that she was done waiting for him to ask. But as the heavy steel door of the safe room slammed shut, Nola realized that the shadows of Seoul had finally come to claim their debt. The safe room was a cold, windowless box filled with monitors and emergency supplies. Nola sat on a small cot, her arms wrapped tightly around Maya, who was trembling like a leaf. Every time a dull thud echoed from the floors above, Nola's heart skipped a beat. She watched the screens, her eyes darting between the camera feeds. She saw flashes of gunfire in the garden, silhouettes moving through the smoke, and then she saw him. Daeho was in the thick of it. He wasn't hiding behind his men, he was leading them. He moved with a terrifying grace, his silver dragon ring glinting as he reloaded his weapon. He looked like a god of war, but Nola could see the desperation in his movements. He wasn't just fighting for territory anymore. He was fighting for the two people locked in a steel box beneath his feet. "Is the bad man coming, Nola?" Maya whispered, her voice muffled by Nola's shawl. "No, baby," Nola lied, her voice cracking. "The boss is making sure the house is quiet. Just close your eyes." Suddenly, the screen showing the main hallway went static. Then another. Then another. One by one, the eyes of the house were being blinded. Minute G, who stood by the door with her weapon drawn, cursed under her breath. "They've cut the main feed," Minute G said. "That means they've bypassed the outer perimeter. They're inside." Nola felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The Jang Syndicate wasn't just throwing stones anymore, they were trying to tear the mountain down. She realized then that as long as she was the bride, she was the ultimate prize. If they captured her, Dae-ho would have to surrender everything he had built. Upstairs, the heavy oak doors of the foyer burst open. It wasn't Boss Jang who stepped through the smoke, it was a younger man, lean and scarred, wearing a tactical vest. This was Kato, a mercenary hired by the rivals, a man who had no code and no mercy. Dae-ho met him in the center of the hall. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and expensive wood. "Where is she, Park?" Kato sneered, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Give us the girl and the Jamaican brat, and maybe we'll let you keep your head." Dae-ho didn't answer with words. He lunged. The two men collided in a blur of violence. It wasn't like the tea house, this was a fight for survival. Kato was faster, but Dae-ho had the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. They crashed into a display of ancient pottery, shards of thousand-year-old clay flying like shrapnel. Dae-ho pinned Kato against the wall, his hand crushing the younger man's throat. "You breathe her name again," Dae-ho hissed, "and I will bury you in a hole so deep the sun will forget you existed." But as Dae-ho prepared to finish the fight, a voice crackled over Kato's radio. "We found the entrance to the lower levels. Moving in now." Dae-ho's blood turned to ice. He looked toward the secret staircase that led to the safe room. He had been distracted. It was a trap. YouTube CTA 2, oh no, they found the safe room. My heart is literally in my throat right now. Do you think Dae-ho can make it back down there in time to save Nola and Maya? Or is the Queen of Shadows going to have to fight her own way out? Drop a watch in the comments if you're as stressed as I am, and if you're new here, make sure to subscribe, you don't want to miss what happens in the next chapter. Down in the safe room, the heavy steel door began to vibrate. Someone was using a thermal torch on the hinges. Sparks began to fly, smelling of burnt metal and doom. Minute G pushed Nola and Maya into the farthest corner. "Get behind the desk. Don't come out no matter what you hear." Nola didn't just hide. She looked around the room. She was a girl from the streets of Jamaica. She knew that being a victim was a choice. She saw a heavy fire extinguisher on the wall and a set of steel letter openers on the desk. She grabbed the extinguisher, her mahogany skin glistening with sweat, her braids pulled back tight. "Nola, stay down," Minute G hissed. "I'm not watching you die for me while I do nothing," Nola shouted back. The door gave way with a deafening crash. 3 men in black masks rushed in. Minute G fired, taking down the first one, but the second man tackled her to the ground. The third man headed straight for the corner where Maya was screaming. He reached out a gloved hand to grab Nola's hair. "Come here, you little." Clang. Nola swung the fire extinguisher with every ounce of strength she had. It caught the man square in the temple. He crumpled to the floor like a sack of potatoes. Nola didn't stop. She grabbed the heavy desk chair and shoved it toward the man fighting Minute G, giving her guard enough time to regain her footing and finish the job. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and Maya's soft whimpering. You hit him," Minute G gasped, looking at the unconscious mercenary on the floor. "He touched my house," Nola said, her voice trembling but her eyes burning with a new, dangerous light. "Nobody touches my house." Footsteps pounded down the hallway. Nola raised the extinguisher again, ready to fight for her life, when a familiar figure skidded into the doorway. It was Dae-ho. His suit was torn, his face was streaked with blood and soot, and his eyes were wide with a terror Nola had never seen before. He looked at the bodies on the floor, then at Nola standing over them like a guardian angel. He didn't care about the code. He didn't care about the men watching. He ran to her, pulling her and Maya into his arms. He held them so tight Nola could hear his heart hammering against his ribs like a drum. "I thought I lost you," he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "I thought I was too late." Nola dropped the extinguisher and buried her face in his chest. The scent of sandalwood and smoke was the most beautiful thing she had ever smelled. "We're okay, Dae-ho. We're okay." He pulled back just an inch, his large, scarred hands cupping her face. He looked at her with such raw, unprotected love that it took Nola's breath away. His vow was still there, a silent barrier between them, but in that moment, the barrier felt thinner than a sheet of paper. "They are gone," Daeho promised, his eyes turning back to the door with a cold, lethal focus. "But they have made this personal. They didn't just attack a business tonight. They attacked my heart." He looked at Nola, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, understanding what came next. The silent promise was over. The war for Seoul was no longer about territory or money. It was about vengeance. And for the first time, Nola Vance wasn't just following the boss. She was standing right beside him. The aftermath of the attack left the mansion smelling of charred wood and expensive chemicals. While the cleaning crews worked in silence to erase the bloodstains from the marble, a different kind of tension began to brew. Nola wasn't the same girl who had walked into the alleyway weeks ago. The adrenaline of the fight still hummed in her veins, and for the first time, she felt the weight of the platinum ring on her finger as a badge of power, not just a shackle. Daeho had been locked in his study for 6 hours. The family council, the elders who had been with the Park Syndicate since his father's time, had arrived. They were old men with wrinkled faces and hearts made of flint. They didn't like that a foreigner was the reason their sanctuary had been breached. They didn't like that Daeho was distracted. Nola stood outside the heavy oak doors, listening to the muffled, angry shouts in Korean. "She is a curse," one elder shouted. "The Jang Syndicate struck us because you showed a soft spot for a girl who brings nothing to our table. No dowry, no connections, no bloodline." Nola didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed the doors open. The room went silent. 6 elderly men in traditional silk robes turned to stare at her. Daeho sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of exhaustion. He looked at Nola, his eyes warning her to stay back, but she ignored the silent command. She walked straight to the table, her microbraids swinging, her yellow hoodie replaced by a sharp, tailored black blazer. "You're talking about me like I'm a piece of furniture," Nola said, her Jamaican lilt cutting through the cold air of the room. "But I'm the one who held the wound of your future boss while you all were hiding in your offices. I'm the one who knocked out a mercenary while your security was bypassed." The elders looked outraged. One of them, a man named Elder Kim, slammed his hand on the table. "You have no right to speak here. You are a guest by mercy, not by merit. I am the wife of Daeho Park," Nola snapped back, leaning over the table. "And in my country, we don't wait for permission to protect what's ours. You say I bring nothing to the table? I brought your boss's son back from the grave. What have you done lately besides grow old and complain?" Daeho's hand went to his mouth to hide a ghost of a smile. He was fascinated. He had never seen anyone stand up to the council, let alone a 20-year-old girl with gold beads in her hair. "Enough," Daeho barked, though his eyes stayed on Nola. "The council is dismissed. My wife and I have things to discuss." The elders grumbled, bowing stiffly to Daeho but pointedly ignoring Nola as they filed out. When the door clicked shut, the silence in the room became heavy and warm. Daeho stood up and walked around the table. He stopped right in front of Nola. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "You are challenging a lot of people today, Nola. The Jang Syndicate, the elders, and me. I'm not challenging you, Daeho," she said, her voice softening. "I'm challenging the idea that I'm just a victim. You made a vow to protect me, but who protects you? You're carrying all this alone." Daeho looked down at her. The discipline he worked so hard to maintain was fraying at the edges. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to tell her that she was the only thing making sense in a world of chaos. But he was a man of his word. He wouldn't break the vow. "I have a mission for you," Daeho said, changing the subject to keep his focus. "If you want to prove you belong at this table, I need you to go where I cannot. There is a charity gala tomorrow night. The wife of the mayor will be there. She holds the keys to the port permits the Jang syndicate is trying to steal. If you can get her on our side, you do more damage to our enemies than 1,000 bullets. Nola nodded. A gala. You want me to play the mysterious bride in front of the whole city? I want you to be yourself, Daeho said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. Because yourself is the most dangerous thing in this room. The night of the gala arrived. The venue was a glittering glass palace in the heart of Seoul, filled with the city's elite. Designers, politicians, and billionaires moved through the room like colorful fish in an aquarium. Nola stepped out of the limousine, and for a moment, the cameras stopped clicking. She was breathtaking. She wore a floor-length, shimmering gold gown that made her ebony skin look like it was dipped in sunlight. Her hair was styled in an elegant, high-braided bun, adorned with gold leaf. Beside her, Daeho looked like a shadow in a midnight black tuxedo. As they walked inside, the whispers started. Is that her? The one from the rumors? She doesn't look like a typical park bride. Nola felt the stings of the words, but she kept her head high. She spotted the mayor's wife, a stern-looking woman in a traditional hanbok, surrounded by a wall of socialites. Go, Daeho whispered in her ear. I will handle the husbands. You handle the power. Nola approached the group. At first, the women ignored her, continuing their conversation in rapid Korean. Nola waited for a gap, then spoke in her clear, melodic English. I couldn't help but notice the jade on your necklace, madam, Nola said, gesturing to the older woman's jewelry. In Jamaica, we have stones that reflect the ocean, but that jade, it reflects the soul of this city. The mayor's wife turned, surprised. She looked at Nola, really looked at her. She saw the intelligence in her eyes and the grace in her posture. You are the one Daeho married so suddenly, the woman said, her English perfect. They say you are a girl from the streets. Why would a girl from the streets know about the soul of a city? Because the streets are where the soul lives, Nola replied. The skyscrapers are just the hat. If you want to know if a city is healthy, you don't look at the penthouse, you look at the docks. And right now, the docks are being poisoned by men who don't care about soul. They only care about greed. The two women talked for an hour. Nola didn't use jargon or threats. She talked about community, about her sister, and about the vision she saw in Daeho's eyes, a vision of a city that was safe for everyone. Across the room, Daeho watched her. He was supposed to be talking to the chief of police, but his eyes kept drifting to the gold-clad woman who was effortlessly charming the most powerful woman in the room. He felt a pride he had never known. She wasn't just his bride, she was his equal. Suddenly, a waiter leaned in close to Nola, whispering something that made her face go pale. She looked toward the exit, then toward Daeho. The waiter was a plant. The Jang syndicate had infiltrated the gala. Madam, the waiter whispered, there is a phone call for you in the lobby. It's about your sister, Maya. Something has happened at the mansion. Nola's heart stopped. She didn't think. She didn't alert Daeho. She followed the waiter toward the quiet, darkened hallway of the lobby. The moment the doors closed behind her, the waiter's polite expression vanished. He reached into his jacket, but Nola was faster. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from a pedestal and smashed it against the wall, using the jagged base as a weapon. Don't you dare mention my sister's name, she hissed. But as she backed away, she felt a cold hand grab her shoulder. It was Boss Jang himself, hidden in the shadows of the cloakroom. You're a brave girl, Jang sneered, a knife flashing in his hand. But let's see how brave your husband is when he has to choose between his vow and your life. Before Nola could scream, the door burst open. Daeho stood there, his eyes glowing with a murderous light. He didn't have a gun. He didn't need one. He looked at Jang, then at Nola, and the air in the hallway seemed to vibrate with his rage. I told you, Jang, Daeho said, his voice a death rattle. You don't touch what belongs to me. The bride's challenge had turned into a trap, but the Jang syndicate had forgotten one thing. A cornered queen is more dangerous than a king, and Nola Vance was just getting started. The walk back to the limousine from the gala was a blur of flashing lights and heavy silence. Daecho's hand was a permanent fixture on Nola's arm, his grip so firm it was as if he were trying to fuse their shadows together. Back at the mansion, the air felt different. The silent promise had been tested by a blade in a dark hallway, and though Nola had escaped unscathed, the emotional walls between her and the boss were starting to crumble. Inside the grand foyer, Daeho finally let go. He paced the marble floor like a caged leopard, his tuxedo jacket discarded on a chair. "You were supposed to stay in the room, Nola," he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I told you to handle the power, not walk into a trap because of a whispered lie." Nola stood her ground. Her gold gown shimmered under the chandeliers, but her face was set in a mask of defiance. "He mentioned Maya, Daeho. What was I supposed to do? Sit there and sip champagne while I wondered if my sister was being hurt?" Daeho stopped pacing. He turned to her, his chest heaving. "You were supposed to trust me. My life is built on anticipating every move, but I can't think straight when you're out of my sight. Don't you see? You've become the only thing I can't afford to lose." The confession hung in the air, raw and heavy. Nola stepped closer to him, the gold leaf in her hair catching the soft light. "Then stop pushing me away. Stop acting like I'm a liability and start realizing I'm the only person in this house who isn't afraid of you." She reached out, her dark, slender fingers gently touching the silver dragon ring on his hand. This time, Daeho didn't pull away. He looked down at their hands, the contrast of her mahogany skin against his pale, scarred knuckles. It was a visual of two worlds colliding, and for the first time, it didn't look like a conflict. It looked like a match. "I made a vow," Daeho whispered, his voice cracking. "I promised I wouldn't touch you. I promised I would wait. And you are a man of honor for that," Nola said softly, her honey brown eyes searching his. "But honor doesn't mean you have to be a statue. You saved me tonight. Again. And I want to know the man who does that, not just the boss." Daeho let out a long, shaky breath. He led her toward the library, the one room in the house that felt like a sanctuary. He poured 2 glasses of water, no whiskey tonight, and they sat on the floor by the fireplace, the embers glowing a deep, comforting orange for the next few hours. They didn't talk about the Jang Syndicate or the ports. They talked about the things that made them human. Nola told him about Jamaica, about the smell of jerk chicken on the breeze, the sound of the ocean at night, and how she used to dance in the rain until her mother called her in. She told him about her dreams of becoming a doctor, a dream she put on hold to save Maya. Daeho listened with an intensity that made Nola feel like she was the only person in the world. In return, he told her about his childhood. He spoke about a father who was even colder than he was, a man who taught him that love was a weakness to be exploited. "I grew up thinking that if I felt something for someone, it gave my enemies a knife to hold to my throat," Daeho said, staring into the fire. "So I stopped feeling. I became the stone they wanted me to be. But then I saw you in that alley. You were crying for my son, a boy you didn't know. You gave him your warmth when the world was cold." He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, his hand moved as if to brush a stray braid from her face. He stopped an inch away, his fingers trembling. The vow was there, the unseen bond that kept them together but also kept them apart. "You don't have to be stone with me," Nola whispered. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was a simple act of shared vulnerability, but to Daeho, it felt more powerful than a physical claim. He rested his head against hers, closing his eyes. In that library, surrounded by the scent of old paper and wood smoke, the mafia boss and the Jamaican girl found a moment of peace that neither had ever known. It was an unseen bond, a connection built on shared pain and silent understanding. They weren't being intimate in the way the world expected, but their souls were intertwining in a way that no contract could ever dictate. However, the peace was shattered by a sharp vibration on the table. Daecho's encrypted phone was lit up with a message from his inside source at the docks. "The Jang Syndicate has moved. They aren't attacking us. They are attacking the ship carrying the medical supplies for the city's children's hospital. Daeho stood up, the warmth of the fire replaced by the cold ice of his duty. He looked at Nola, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination. They are trying to ruin my reputation by making it look like I cannot protect the city's most vulnerable, Daeho said. They want the people to turn against the Park family. Then we don't let them, Nola said, standing up and smoothing her gold gown. You go to the docks. I'll call the mayor's wife. If we can get the media there to show you saving those supplies, Jang's plan will backfire. Daeho looked at her, his partner, his equal, his wife. He reached out and grabbed her hand, squeezing it once. Stay in the house. This time, I mean it. Be careful, Daeho, she called out as he strode toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her one last time. I have a promise to keep, Nola. I'm not going anywhere. As he left, Nola picked up the phone. She was no longer just a bride in a golden cage. She was the strategist for the Park Empire. And as she looked at the silver ring on her finger, she realized that the unseen bond between them was about to become their greatest weapon. The city of Seoul at 3 o'clock in the morning is a place of ghosts and neon. While the rest of the world slept, the docks were alive with the sound of lapping water and the distant hum of machinery. But tonight, there was a different sound, the metallic slide of gun bolts and the heavy breathing of men waiting to kill. Daeho moved through the shadows of the shipping containers like a panther. He was dressed in tactical black, his face smudged with soot to kill the reflection of the harbor lights. He had sent his main force to the North Gate as a distraction, but he was here at the central pier alone with only his two most trusted men. He knew Jang's style. Jang didn't care about the supplies, he wanted a spectacle. He wanted to blow the ship sky high and blame the Park family's negligence. Back at the mansion, Nola was far from resting. She was in the command center, her eyes fixed on the heat signature maps. She had the mayor's wife on a private line. Madam, Nola said into her headset, her voice steady and commanding. The Jang Syndicate is about to destroy the very medicine your hospital needs. If you send the Coast Guard and the news crews now, you won't just be saving lives, you'll be exposing the rot in this city. And what about your husband, Nola? The mayor's wife asked. If the cameras see him there, he will be arrested. Nola looked at the screen. She saw Daeho's heat signature moving toward the main deck of the ship. He isn't there for the cameras. He's there to make sure there's still a ship left to film. Just do your part, and I'll do mine. As Nola hung up, she saw something on the monitor that made her blood run cold. A second group of signatures was approaching from the water divers. They were planting explosives on the hull of the ship while Daeho was fighting the men on the deck. Minute G. Nola shouted. The divers. Daeho doesn't see the divers. The comms are jammed, madam, Minute G replied, frantically typing. The Jang Syndicate has a high-frequency jammer on the pier. Nola didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy tactical jacket and her keys. We're going. Now. Madam, the boss will kill me if I let you leave. And Jang will kill him if we don't. Nola snapped, her Jamaican fire flaring up. I know how to override a jammer, we just need to get within 100 yards. Move. The drive to the docks was a blur of high-speed turns. Nola sat in the passenger seat of the armored SUV, a specialized signal booster in her lap. As they neared the shipyard, the radio static began to clear. Daeho, can you hear me? Nola screamed into the radio. On the deck of the ship, Daeho ducked behind a steel crate as bullets sparked against the metal. He fumbled for his earpiece. Nola, what are you doing? I told you to stay. Shut up and listen. Nola interrupted. There are divers beneath the waterline, starboard side. They're setting charges. You have 3 minutes before that ship becomes a fireball. Daeho didn't waste a second. He looked over the railing. He saw the bubbles rising from the dark water. He looked at his men. Cover the deck. I'm going over. Boss. No, his enforcer yelled. But Daeho was already in motion. He shed his tactical vest and dived into the freezing, oily water of the harbor. The cold was like 1,000 needles, but he ignored it. He swam toward the hull, his eyes burning as he searched the darkness. He saw them, 3 divers attaching a massive magnetic crate to the side of the ship. A brutal underwater struggle began. Daeho had no air tank, only the breath in his lungs and the rage in his heart. He intercepted the first diver, ripping the regulator from his mouth. He used the man's own dive knife to disable the second. But the third diver had already armed the timer. Daeho grabbed the explosive. The red numbers were counting down. 0:15, 0:14. He couldn't disarm it. He had to move it. He kicked off the hull, swimming as hard as he could toward an empty concrete pylon 50 feet away. His lungs were screaming, his vision blurring. On the pier, Nola jumped out of the car. She ran to the edge of the dock, her eyes searching the black water. Daeho, Daeho, where are you? Suddenly, a muffled boom shook the harbor. A massive plume of water erupted near the pylon, sending a wave crashing against the pier. No! Nola screamed, her voice tearing her throat. She ran toward the edge, ready to jump in, when a hand broke the surface. Daeho emerged, gasping for air, his hair plastered to his forehead. He grabbed a rusted ladder and hauled himself up. Nola didn't care about the guards, the cameras arriving in the distance, or the blood on his face. She threw her arms around his wet, shivering body. "You idiot. You absolute idiot," she sobbed into his neck. Daeho wrapped his arms around her, his body shaking from the cold and the adrenaline. "You saved the ship," he panted. "The cameras, they're here." Sure enough, news helicopters were circling above, their spotlights illuminating the scene. They saw the brave businessman Daeho Park, dripping wet, having just saved a ship full of medicine from a terrorist attack. They saw his beautiful wife holding him, the image of a power couple that the city would fall in love with by morning. In the distance, Nola saw Boss Jang's car speeding away. He had lost. Not just the battle, but the war for public opinion. Daeho pulled back, looking at Nola. His eyes were soft, filled with a profound gratitude. "You came for me," he whispered. "I told you," Nola said, wiping a smudge of grease from his cheek. "I'm your wife. I don't leave my husband behind." The shadows in the night had tried to swallow them, but instead, they had only forged a bond that was becoming unbreakable. But as the sirens grew louder, Daeho knew that while he was now a hero to the public, he was a dead man walking to his enemies. The final showdown was coming, and this time, there would be no safe rooms to hide in. The morning after the shipyard explosion, the world was different. Every news station in the country was showing the image of Nola and Daeho at the docks. The headlines called them the saviors of Seoul. For the first time, the park name wasn't associated with fear, but with heroism. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with a new kind of intensity. The public victory had bought them time, but it had also pushed the Jang syndicate into a corner. And a cornered predator is the most dangerous kind. Daeho was in his private quarters, sitting on a low stool while a doctor cleaned the deep gash on his shoulder from the underwater fight. He didn't flinch as the needle pierced his skin, but his eyes followed Nola as she paced the room. She had traded her gold gala dress for a simple, oversized sweater and leggings, her braids tied back in a messy bun. She looked like the girl from the alley again, but her eyes held the weight of a queen. "The doctor says you need to rest," Nola said, stopping in front of him. Her voice was soft, but it carried an edge of command. "I'll rest when Jang is in the ground," Daeho replied, his voice a low rumble. He winced slightly as the doctor finished and bowed out of the room, leaving them alone. Nola stepped closer. She took a bowl of warm water and a soft cloth from the side table. Without asking, she began to wipe the dried salt and blood from the back of his neck, where the doctor had missed. Daeho stiffened. The touch was light, but to him, it felt like a brand. "Nola, the vow." The vow was about intimacy. "Daeho," she whispered, her fingers moving gently against his skin. "This is trust. There's a difference. Daeho closed his eyes, his head bowing forward. He let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 20 years. In the silence of the room, the forbidden trust between them grew. They weren't just allies, they were becoming each other's gravity. I found out something, Nola said, her voice dropping lower. While I was looking through the digital archives of your father's old records, I saw a name. The name of the company that owned the tenement building where my parents lived in Jamaica before the fire. Daeho froze. He slowly turned around to look at her, his face pale. Nola. It was a shell company, Daeho, she said, her eyes filling with tears. A company owned by the Park Syndicate 20 years ago. My family's life was destroyed by a business move your father made. I spent my whole life hating the shadows that took my parents, and now I've married the king of those shadows. Daeho reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the sleeve of her sweater. Nola, I didn't know. My father, he was a man of cold calculations. If I could change the past, if I could give you back what was taken. You can't, Nola interrupted, a single tear rolling down her mahogany cheek. But you can change the future. You told me your vow was about honor. If you really want to settle the debt, don't just protect me. Change the syndicate. Make it something my parents wouldn't have been afraid of. Daeho looked at her with a profound sense of awe. Any other person would have used this information to kill him or run away. But Nola was asking him for redemption. She was trusting a monster to become a man. I promise you, Daeho whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. On my life and the lives of my ancestors, the park name will mean something different because of you. It was a moment of pure, raw vulnerability. No masks, no titles, no weapons. Just two broken people trying to build something whole in a world of shards. But the moment was shattered when the heavy doors of the suite were thrown open. It was Ji-hoon, Daeho's son. He was pale and leaning on a cane, but his eyes were wide with terror. Dad. Nola. You have to see the gate. Ji-hoon gasped, his voice thin from his recovery. They rushed to the monitors in the hallway. Outside the main gates, a massive crowd had gathered. But it wasn't the media. It was hundreds of people from the poorest districts of Seoul, the people the Jang Syndicate usually exploited. They were carrying candles and signs with Nola's face on them. They were calling her the angel of the docks. They think you're their savior, Ji-hoon said, a small smile touching his lips. Jang can't attack us now, Daeho realized, his eyes narrowing. Not with the whole city watching the front door. He's lost his leverage. But he hasn't lost his spite, Nola warned, looking at the flickering candles. She was right. Deep in the shadows of a warehouse across the city, Boss Jang was watching the same footage. He wasn't screaming. He was smiling, the smile of a man who had decided that if he couldn't have the city, he would burn it all down. If the people love the queen, Jang whispered to his remaining men, then we will show them how a queen dies. Prepare the final strike. No more games. We hit them where it hurts the most. The trust between Nola and Daeho was now their strongest shield, but as the sun began to set, the air turned cold. The forbidden love that had grown in the dark was about to be dragged into the light of a fire that no one might survive. The atmosphere inside the park mansion had shifted from a fortress of protection to a pressure cooker. While the crowds outside cheered for the angel of the docks, the internal senses of the estate were screaming. The Jang Syndicate had gone silent, too silent. In the mafia world, silence isn't peace, it's the indrawing of breath before a scream. Daeho spent the morning in the war room, but his mind was in the hallway where Nola was teaching Maya a traditional Jamaican song. The sound of their laughter felt like a sacrilege in a house built on blood. He looked at his hands that had strangled, struck, and signed off on destruction, and then he looked at the wedding band on his finger. The breaking point wasn't a physical wall, it was the moment Daeho realized he could no longer separate the boss from the man. Sir, Minute G interrupted his thoughts, her face ashen. We've lost contact with our perimeter team in the west sector. And the crowds outside, they're being provoked. Dae-ho rushed to the monitors. The peaceful candlelight vigil was turning into a riot. Men in hoodies, Jang's plants, were throwing stones at the police line and shouting that the Park family was holding Nola captive. They were using her popularity as a weapon to tear down the gates. "They're going to use the crowd as a human shield," Dae-ho hissed. "If my guards fire to protect the house, we look like monsters. If we don't, they swarm us." Suddenly, the lights in the mansion flickered and died. The hum of the backup generators kicked in, but the security screens remained black. "Nola!" Dae-ho roared, sprinting toward the living quarters. He found her in the hallway, shielding Maya. The glass in the grand foyer shattered as a brick wrapped in a burning rag skidded across the marble. The fire caught the silk curtains instantly. "We have to go. The safe room is compromised, they know the layout." Dae-ho grabbed Nola's hand, but this time, he didn't lead her to the basement. He led her toward the roof. As they ran, the sound of the front gates groaning under the weight of the mob echoed through the house. Gunshots rang out, not from Dae-cho's men, but from the snipers Jang had hidden in the crowd. It was chaos. The breaking point had arrived. They reached the roof just as a black helicopter with no markings crested the hill. It wasn't a rescue. It was Jang's final move. Dae-ho shoved Nola and Maya behind a brick chimney stack. He pulled a handgun from his waistband, his eyes wild. "Minute G. Take the girl and the child to the helipad on the east wing. My personal pilot is waiting." "What about you?" Nola screamed over the roar of the wind and the fire below. "I have to hold them off." Dae-ho yelled back. "If I don't stay, they'll follow the bird. Go, Nola." "That's an order." Nola looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the man who had vowed never to touch her, the man who had brought her sister across the ocean, the man who was currently willing to die so she could live. The breaking point snapped in her heart. She didn't run. She stepped out from behind the chimney, grabbed Dae-ho by the lapels of his soot-stained jacket, and pulled him down. She kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fierce, and tasted of smoke and salt. It was the answer to his vow. It was the ask he had been waiting for. For a second, the world stopped. The fire, the mob, the helicopter, it all vanished. There was only the heat of her skin against his and the silent promise that if they died tonight, they died as one. Dae-ho pulled back, breathless, his eyes wide with a shock that quickly turned into a lethal, focused calm. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered. "Now I really can't afford to die." The helicopter hovered over the roof, and two men rappelled down, submachine guns blazing. Dae-ho pushed Nola toward the exit. "Go. Now. I'm right behind you." Nola grabbed Maya's hand and ran. She heard the exchange of gunfire behind her, the grunts of physical combat, and the terrifying sound of metal hitting stone. She didn't look back until she reached the East Wing helipad. The rotors of Dae-cho's private chopper were already spinning. The pilot was signaling them to hurry. Minute G shoved Maya inside, but Nola stopped at the edge of the skid. "Where is he?" Nola demanded. A figure emerged from the smoke of the roof. It was Dae-ho, but he was limping. He had a deep cut on his forehead, and his arm was hanging at a strange angle. Behind him, Boss Jang stepped into the light, holding a detonator. "You think you won, Park?" Jang screamed over the wind. "I've rigged the foundations. If I don't get the girl, nobody gets the girl." Dae-ho looked at the helicopter, then at Nola. He saw the tears streaming down her mahogany face. He saw the love that had bloomed in the middle of a wasteland. "Fly." Dae-ho commanded the pilot. "No. Dae-ho." Nola tried to jump out, but Minute G held her back with a grip of iron. "I love you, little bird," Dae-ho shouted, his voice cracking the night air. As the helicopter lifted off, Nola watched through the glass as Dae-ho lunged at Jang. The two men disappeared into a cloud of smoke just as a massive explosion rocked the base of the mansion. The entire East Wing, the place Nola had called home for weeks, began to collapse in a roar of orange flame and grey stone. "Dae-ho." Nola's scream was lost in the thunder of the collapse. She watched as the lights of the estate flickered out for the last time. The King of Seoul had made his final move. He had saved his queen, but as the helicopter drifted into the dark clouds over the city, Nola felt a hole open in her soul that no amount of gold or safety could ever fill. The breaking point had been reached, and everything they had built was buried under the rubble. Or was it? The silence inside the helicopter was deafening. Below them, the hills of Seoul were glowing with a hellish orange light. Nola pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the window as she watched the Park estate, the place where she had found a strange, dangerous kind of home, crumble into a skeleton of steel and fire. "We have to go back," Nola whispered, her voice sounding like it belonged to a ghost. "Minute G, tell the pilot to turn around. He's still down there." "Madam, the boss gave me a direct order," Minute G said, her own eyes glassy with unshed tears. She held a sobbing Maya in her lap, shielding the child from the view of the destruction. "My job is to get you to the safe house in Incheon. If he didn't make it, we are all that's left of the Park legacy." "I don't care about a legacy," Nola screamed, turning on her. The gold beads in her hair, now tangled and scorched, rattled with her fury. "I care about the man who was willing to die for a girl he barely knew. Turn this plane around." But as she reached for the cockpit door, a crackle came over the radio. It wasn't the pilot's voice. It was a heavy, labored breathing that made Nola's heart stop. "Nola! Daeho!" Nola lunged for the headset, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. "Daeho, is that you? Please, tell me you're okay." The tunnels," the voice rasped. It was faint, drowned out by the sound of crumbling stone. "I made it to the drainage tunnels. He's gone. But I'm pinned. Don't come back. The syndicate is in chaos. Go to the safe house. Trust the code." The line went dead. 3 hours later, Nola sat in a small, nondescript apartment overlooking the Incheon harbor. It was a far cry from the marble palace she had grown accustomed to. There were no maids, no silk sheets, only the sound of the waves and the ticking of a plastic wall clock. Maya had finally fallen into a fitful sleep in the back room. Nola sat at a small wooden table, staring at the platinum ring on her finger. She felt a profound sense of vulnerability. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just fighting for her own survival or Maya's. She was grieving for a man she had spent most of her time trying to understand. A key turned in the lock. Nola stood up, grabbing a heavy glass bottle from the counter, her eyes narrowing. The door pushed open, and a man stumbled in. He was covered in grey dust, his navy suit jacket torn to shreds. His left arm was wrapped in a makeshift sling made of a silk tie, and his face was a map of bruises and blood. It was Daeho. Nola dropped the bottle. It shattered on the floor, but she didn't care. She ran to him, catching him as his knees buckled. She guided him to the small sofa, her hands moving over his face, his chest, his arms, making sure he was real. "You're alive," she sobbed, burying her face in his neck, ignoring the smell of smoke and damp earth. "You're actually alive." Daeho let out a low groan of pain, but he used his good arm to pull her closer. For a long time, they just sat there in the dark, the king and queen of nothing, holding on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. "I had to see you," Daeho whispered, his voice cracking. "I had to know you made it." He looked around the small, cramped apartment. "I'm sorry, Nola. I promised you a palace, and I brought you to a hole in the wall." "I don't need a palace, Daeho," Nola said, pulling back to look him in the eye. She took a first aid kit and began to gently clean the deep cut over his eyebrow. "I told you before. I'm a girl from the projects. I know how to be happy with nothing. But I don't know how to be happy without you." Daeho looked at her, and for the first time, the mafia boss was gone. The mask of stone had been pulverized by the explosions. He looked small, tired, and deeply human. "I grew up in that mansion," he said softly, his eyes distant. My father used to tell me that walls were the only thing that kept us safe. He said that if people could see our vulnerability, they would use it like a knife. I spent 45 years building those walls. And tonight, I watched them burn. He reached out with his trembling hand and touched the gap between Nola's front teeth, a tiny, beautiful imperfection he had admired from afar. When the ceiling started to come down, I wasn't thinking about the money or the power. I was thinking about that night in the garden. I was thinking about how your skin feels like sun-warmed earth. I realized. I've been a dead man for a long time, Nola. You're the one who brought me back. He leaned his head back against the cushion, his eyes fluttering shut. I have nothing left but my name and a few loyal men. The elders will try to replace me. The other syndicates will come for what's left. I am a target, Nola. You should take Maya and the money I put in the offshore account. You should run. Nola stopped cleaning his wound. She grabbed his chin and forced him to look at her. Listen to me, Daeho Park. You saved my sister. You saved my life. And you gave me a kiss that told me everything I needed to know about your vow. I'm not running. We are going to take back what's yours. And we're going to do it together. Daeho looked at her, a spark of the old fire returning to his eyes. You're a dangerous woman, Nola Vance. I'm a Park now, she reminded him with a small, fierce smile. And Parks don't lose. As the sun began to rise over Incheon Harbor, Nola sat on the floor beside the sofa where Daeho had finally fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep. She held his hand, her thumb tracing the silver dragon ring. She knew the vulnerability they shared tonight was a gift, but it was also a warning. The world thought they were dead or defeated. That was their only advantage. She stood up and walked to the window, watching the fishing boats head out to sea. She wasn't the mysterious bride anymore. She was the one holding the pieces of a broken empire. And as she looked at her reflection in the glass, she didn't see a girl in a yellow hoodie. She saw a woman who was ready to walk through fire to protect her king. The ultimate test was coming. The Jang Syndicate might be gone, but the shadows of Seoul were long, and there were always new monsters waiting in the dark. But for the first time, Nola wasn't afraid. She had seen the man behind the boss, and she knew that a man with nothing left to lose is the most powerful man in the world. The Incheon safe house was no longer a place of rest, it had become a war room. For 3 days, Daeho and Nola lived in the shadows of that small apartment, surviving on ramen and adrenaline. Daeho's wounds were healing, but his spirit was on a razor's edge. The news was full of the tragic fire at the Park estate. To the public, the King of Seoul was dead. To the Underworld, the throne was vacant. But Nola was busy. While Daeho coordinated with the few loyal captains who hadn't defected to the rival gangs, Nola was using the one thing the Mafia usually ignored, the people. They think we're gone, Nola said, leaning over a laptop she had secured from a local contact. But the docks are still ours, Daeho. The workers, the families of the kids who got that medicine, they don't want a new boss. They want us. Daeho looked at her, his arm still in a sling but his eyes sharp as flint. The ultimate test isn't the public, Nola. It's the meeting tonight. The empty chair council. The heads of every syndicate are meeting at the Grand Hyatt to divide my territory. If I don't walk through those doors and prove I'm alive, they'll start a war that will turn Seoul into a graveyard. We're going, Nola said. It wasn't a question. No, Daeho stood up, his towering frame casting a shadow. It's a suicide mission. If they see me, they'll fire before I can speak. They won't fire at me, Nola replied, her eyes burning with a fierce, mahogany light. I'm the angel, remember. The media is still looking for me. If I walk in there with a live stream running to every phone in the city, they can't touch us without starting a revolution. Daeho paused. He looked at the woman he had married to protect the girl in the yellow hoodie who was now suggesting a tactical maneuver that would make a general proud. He realized then that his vow of protection had been a two-way street. She was his shield now, the Grand Hyatt was a fortress of glass and steel. Black cars lined the entrance, and men with earpieces stood every 10 feet. Inside the gold-leafed ballroom, 12 men sat around a circular table. These were the vultures, ready to pick the bones of the Park Empire. The doors swung open. The room went silent. It wasn't the sound of heavy boots they heard, but the rhythmic click-click-click of gold beads. Nola walked in first. She wore a simple, sleeveless black dress that showcased her radiant ebony skin. She held her phone high, the red live light glowing like a ruby. Behind her, emerging from the shadows like a ghost returned from the grave, was Dae-ho. He looked thinner, his face scarred, his arm bound to his chest, but he walked with the weight of a mountain. "The reports of my death," Dae-ho said, his voice a low, lethal vibration that made the men at the table visibly flinch, "have been greatly exaggerated." One of the younger bosses, a man who had already started claiming Dae-ho's docks, reached for a gun under the table. "Don't," Nola said, her voice clear and melodic. She turned the phone toward him. 4 million people are watching this stream, Mr. Choi. If you pull that trigger, the entire city will be at your front gate before the sun rises. Do you want to be a boss, or do you want to be a target for a lynch mob?" Choi froze. The other bosses looked at each other, the greed in their eyes replaced by a cold, calculating fear. They realized that Dae-ho hadn't just survived, he had changed the rules of the game. He wasn't just a mafia boss anymore, he was a folk hero, and his mysterious bride was the one holding the leash of the public's rage. Dae-ho walked to the head of the table, to his chair, which had been left empty. He didn't sit. He slammed his good hand onto the wood. "Here is the new code," Dae-ho announced. "The Park Syndicate is no longer in the business of fear. We are in the business of the city. You will stay in your territories. You will cease the hits on civilian infrastructure. And if you touch a hair on my wife's head, I won't just kill you, I'll let the people of Seoul decide your fate." It was the ultimate test of his power. For 30 agonizing seconds, no one breathed. Then, slowly, the oldest man at the table, a veteran of a dozen wars, stood up and bowed. "Welcome back, King," he whispered. One by one, the other bosses followed suit. They had been beaten not by bullets, but by the sheer, unbreakable will of a man and a woman who had found a way to bridge 2 worlds. As they walked out of the ballroom, the adrenaline finally began to fade. In the elevator, Dae-ho leaned against the wall, his face pale. Nola tucked her phone away and stepped into his space, her hands resting on his chest. "We did it," she whispered. Dae-ho looked down at her, his eyes full of a raw, forbidden emotion. He reached out with his good hand, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "No, Nola. You did it. I was just the ghost. You were the light." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. The elevator hummed as it descended, but for a moment, they were the only 2 people in the universe. They had passed the ultimate test, but as the doors opened to a swarm of reporters and flashing lights, Dae-ho knew that the victory came with a price. They were no longer in the shadows. They were the center of the world. And in the underworld, the only thing more dangerous than being hated is being loved. The Grand Hyatt was behind them, but the echoes of their victory reverberated through every alleyway in Seoul. For the first time in history, the underworld had been forced to bow to the light. But as the black sedan sped through the rain-slicked streets toward a new, secret location, the atmosphere inside wasn't celebratory. It was heavy. Dae-ho stared out the window at the blurred city lights. He was back on his throne, but the throne was different now. It was no longer made of stone and secrecy, it was made of glass. Every move he made, every breath Nola took, was being watched by millions of people who saw them as a symbol of hope and thousands of enemies who saw them as a target. They arrived at a secluded villa on the outskirts of the city, a place of minimalist concrete and ancient pine trees. It was here, in the quiet shadows of the terrace, that the most difficult decision of their lives had to be made. "The elders want me to step down," Dae-ho said, his voice barely audible over the rustle of the pines. He wasn't looking at Nola, he was looking at his silver dragon ring, the symbol of a life he had lived for 45 years. They say a king cannot be a hero. They say the angel of the docks has made the park syndicate too soft. Nola walked up behind him, her shawl wrapped tight against the evening chill. And what do you say? Daeho turned to face her. The bruises on his face were fading, but the weariness in his eyes was deeper than ever. I say they are right. As long as I am the boss, you and Maya are never truly safe. There will always be a Jang, or a Choi, or a shadow waiting to strike. I've spent my life protecting my name, Nola. But now, I want to protect my soul. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch her microbraids. I have a choice. I can stay and fight a never-ending war to reform the syndicate, or I can disappear. I have enough money in offshore accounts to buy us a life anywhere in the world. Jamaica, London, New York, we could be ghosts. Truly free. Nola felt her breath hitch. This was the decision in the shadows. He was offering her the one thing she had wanted since the moment she walked into that alley, her old life back. But with him. But the people, Daeho, Nola whispered. If you leave, who stops the vultures from coming back? If the king leaves, the shadows will just find a new monster. That is the price of freedom, Daeho said, his voice raw. I can save the city, or I can save my family. I am not strong enough to do both anymore. The night grew colder as they stood on the terrace, the silence between them filled with the weight of 1,000 futures. Nola looked at the man before her, a man who had been a monster, a savior, and a husband. She realized that her love for him wasn't just about his protection, it was about his potential. You told me once that your honor was the only thing you had left, Nola said, her honey-brown eyes searching his. If we run, we are living a lie. We'd be happy, but we'd be watching our shoulders every time a car slows down. That's not freedom, Daeho. That's just a different kind of prison. Daeho's jaw tightened. Then what are you saying? I'm saying we don't run. And we don't stay the same, Nola said, her voice growing stronger. We dismantle the syndicate from the inside. We turn the park name into a foundation. We use the power we have to make sure no other girl ever has to choose between her life and her dignity in an alleyway. Daeho looked at her with a mixture of fear and admiration. It was a suicide mission of a different kind, a political and social war that could take years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He just held it in the palm of his hand. If we do this, Nola, if we stay and fight this way, I want to do it right. No more contracts. No more vows of distance. He opened the box. Inside was a ring that wasn't platinum or silver. It was a simple, polished black diamond, as dark as the Seoul night but as brilliant as the sun. Nola Vance, he said, his voice trembling for the first time. I know I am a man of shadows. I know my hands are stained. But if you will have me, I want to be your husband in every sense of the word. Not because of a debt, and not because of a code. But because I cannot imagine a world where I am not looking at you. The decision in the shadows had been made. Nola didn't say a word. She simply held out her hand, letting him slide the black diamond onto her finger next to the platinum band. But as they shared a kiss that tasted of a new beginning, a red dot appeared on the concrete wall behind them. A sniper's laser. Get down. Daeho roared, tackling Nola to the ground just as a bullet shattered the glass door behind them. The elders hadn't waited for his decision. They had made their own. The war for the soul of Seoul wasn't over, it had just moved from the streets to the very heart of the Park family. The glass from the shattered terrace door rained down like diamonds, but there was no beauty in it, only the cold reality of a life that refused to let them go. Daeho kept Nola pinned beneath him, his body a living shield, just as a second shot whistled through the air, embedding itself in the ancient pine tree behind them. Stay low. Daeho hissed. He didn't reach for a gun this time. He reached for his phone. He didn't call the police, and he didn't call his guards. He made a single call to the head of the dockworkers' union, the men who had seen Nola as an angel. The crows are in the garden. Tell the city the king is being executed for choosing them. Within minutes, the hills surrounding the villa were no longer silent. The sound of hundreds of car horns and the rhythmic chanting of the people began to rise from the valley below. The elders had sent professional assassins, but they hadn't accounted for a revolution. As the sirens of the city's people grew louder, the red laser dots vanished. The assassins, fearing the wrath of the mob more than the failure of their mission, melted back into the shadows. The elders had lost their last gamble. Dae-ho stood up slowly, offering his hand to Nola. She took it, her grip firm, her eyes flashing with a cold, clear resolve. They stood together on the ruined terrace, looking out over the city that was now, truly, theirs to reshape. We have reached the end of the journey. Nola and Dae-ho have survived the fire, the betrayal, and the vows that kept them apart. But as they say in the Underworld, every end is just a new beginning. Before I give you the final scene, I want to say a massive thank you for being here with me for all 15 chapters. Your comments, your likes, and your support have made this story come alive. If you want a season 2, I need you to flood the comments with Korean Mafia right now, and if you haven't subscribed, well, you might miss the next epic tale starting tomorrow, 1 year later. The new Park Foundation building stood in the center of Seoul, a beacon of glass and light where the old tenements once crumbled. Nola sat in the executive office, her mahogany skin glowing against a crisp white suit. Her microbraids were adorned with simple silver rings, and on her finger, the black diamond caught the afternoon sun. The door opened, and a much taller, healthier Maya ran in, carrying a backpack full of schoolbooks. Nola, I got an A in my Korean history project. That's my girl, Nola laughed, pulling her sister into a hug. Behind her, Dae-ho entered. He no longer wore the charcoal suits of a Shadow King. He wore a navy blazer and a smile that reached his eyes that were no longer tired or cold. He walked over to Nola, his hand resting naturally on the small of her back. There was no longer a vow of distance between them. They were a husband and wife in every sense, their bond forged in fire and sealed with a promise. The board meeting is in 5 minutes, Dae-ho whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. They're still nervous about the new housing initiative for the dockworkers. Let them be nervous, Nola said, standing up and smoothing her blazer. They'll learn that the new code is better for everyone. Dae-ho looked at her with a pride that had only grown over the past year. He had stepped down from the boss title, handing the day-to-day operations of the legitimate businesses to a council of young, reformed leaders, but everyone knew who the true power was. As they walked toward the boardroom, Dae-ho stopped her near a window that overlooked the harbor. He pulled a small, worn yellow hoodie from a decorative box on the shelf. It was her old hoodie, the one she wore the night they met. I keep this to remind me, Dae-ho said softly. Of what? Nola asked. That the greatest power in the underworld isn't a gun or a vow, he said, leaning down to press a lingering kiss to her forehead. It's a girl who was brave enough to stay in an alleyway when everyone else ran. Nola smiled, taking his hand. They walked into the boardroom together, the king who had found his soul, and the queen who had turned his shadows into light. The promise of the underworld was no longer a threat, it was a vow of a new era. And as the sun set over Seoul, the dragon and the angel watched over their city, finally, truly free.